me honestly, is there still a bridge between you two? Is that friendship still breathing? Oh, absolutely. We are living under the same roof, sharing the same space, and we are keeping the friendship alive. I am fighting with everything I have to win my wife back. Imagine spending 40 long years crafting a reputation of absolute honour, posing as the patriarch of a flawless family, only for Judge Greg Mathis to suddenly take a match and burn that legacy to the ground. The streets began to whisper dark secrets, gossip about a hidden child born in the shadows, scandalous rumours of romances with women young enough to be his daughters, and accusations so twisted they left his oldest compadres speechless. Then, in the heat of August 2024, the hammer finally dropped when his wife Linda marched into court and filed the papers for divorce. The days that followed that separation were like a telenovela come to life, marking some of the most turbulent and dramatic moments we have ever witnessed in the history of famous American families. Stay right here with us as we peel back the layers of this tragedy, discovering how Judge Greg, a man who spent decades preaching righteousness to others, woke up one day to find himself drowning in his own shameful scandal. To understand the man, we must look at the boy. Greg Mathis took his first breath on April 5th, 1960, deep inside Herman Gardens, a concrete jungle of public housing in the heart of Detroit. Constructed back in 1942, that complex was supposed to be a sanctuary, a beacon of hope for workers during the war who simply needed a decent roof over their heads. It was a massive territory stretching over 160 acres and holding the dreams of thousands of families. But by the time young Greg could open his eyes to the world, that dream had already turned into a nightmare. The paint was stripping away like old skin, and the buildings themselves groaned under the weight of neglect, feeling dangerous and abandoned. His mother was the rock of the family, a true warrior trying to hold back the tide all by herself, raising 4 sons after their father turned his back and walked out the door. She worked until her bones ached, but it did not matter how much sweat she poured into her work. The money was never enough to conquer the mountain of bills, and the neighbourhood around them continued to rot from the inside out. By the late 1960s, Herman Gardens was no longer a stepping stone to a better life. It had become a cage, a trap with no easy escape. The poison of illicit substances flooded the streets, and terror was always walking 2 steps behind. When Greg was just a boy of 12, one dark night shattered their innocence forever. A stranger, his mind twisted by drugs, kicked down the door of their sanctuary and tried to assault his mother. In that terrifying instant, those boys watched their entire sense of security turn to dust. They ran from that apartment with nothing but the clothes on their backs, escaping into the night only to end up in another housing project that was even more treacherous than the last. The symphony of their daily existence was not music, but the cracking of gunshots and the endless wailing of police sirens cutting through the air. Yet his mother possessed a spirit of iron. She kept pushing forward, working 2 jobs, sometimes more, sacrificing everything just to keep breath in her family's lungs. But the wolf of hunger was always scratching at the door. And for those boys growing up, felt less like childhood and more like surviving a war zone that the rest of the world refused to look at. The fear, the burning shame, and the rage of being helpless, all of it seeped into Greg's blood, slowly carving out the hard statue of the man he was destined to become. Even before he had the wisdom to comprehend it, his youth was playing out against the backdrop of Vietnam veterans returning to the gritty streets of Detroit. These men came back from the jungle carrying heavy souls, burdened with deep trauma and the chains of addiction. That plague of addiction spilled right into the courtyards of the projects. Within a few short years of Greg being born, Herman Gardens had descended into one of the most violent and dangerous corners of the city. By the early 1970s, the dealers, many of them former soldiers who had lost their way, ruled the corners like kings, selling their poison in broad daylight. The schools transformed into pressure cookers of violence where children were bringing guns into the classroom instead of books. Gangs divided the playgrounds like generals conquering land on a map. Greg did not just watch from the window. At 10 years old, he stepped into the fire, joining the other lost boys in a life of crime. They started by stealing food to eat, breaking into buildings, taking whatever their hands could grab, living like little outlaws. In the beginning, it was purely for survival. But soon the adrenaline became an addiction. Violence was the air they breathed. When Greg was 13, a bullet found him during a robbery. For any other child, bleeding in the street would have been a sign to stop, a terrifying wake-up call to change paths. But in his twisted world, it felt like a baptism proof that he was tough enough for the streets. He wore it like a badge of honour. By 15, his criminal record was a mile long. He was snatching purses and breaking into homes. The trouble became a rhythm, a daily routine. How could a classroom compete with that kind of chaotic energy? He tried to sit at a desk at Hermann Gardens Elementary, attempting to focus on lessons, while fistfights erupted and screams echoed down the hallways. Eventually, they sent him to Peterson's Seventh-day Adventist School, a desperate prayer to save him from the abyss, but the call of the streets was a siren song he could not resist. The projects were in his blood. They were the only home he truly knew. By the time he walked into Wayne Memorial High School, the constant arrests and the weight of the life had crushed his spirit. At just 15 years old, he walked away and dropped out. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened, and he found himself behind bars in juvenile detention. But then, in 1977, while still under the watchful eye of the law, the wind changed direction. Greg managed to earn his GED through Operation Push, a special program built for young souls like him, the ones society had already thrown in the trash. But that second chance did not come for free. What was the price he had to pay? How was Greg going to pull himself out of the quicksand from here? Do not look away. You need to keep watching to witness exactly how Greg rewrote his destiny. For years, his mother, in her strict pride, refused to visit him while he was caged like an animal. But this time she came. She walked into that visiting room and stared at her son through the cold glass. She did not sugarcoat her words. She told him the brutal truth that he had brought disgrace to her name in the neighbourhood, in the schools, and before God in the church. She told him that the neighbours were whispering that his name had become synonymous with shame every time it crossed someone's lips. Then she delivered the blow that shattered him completely. She confessed that she had colon cancer and her time on this earth was running out. Greg would later say that was the moment the lightning struck. The terrifying realisation that his mother might die while he was still a thug in a cell hit him harder than any bullet ever could. The terrifying fear of losing his mother tangled up with the stinging salt of her disappointment and deep pain, sliced right through the hard macho armour Greg had constructed to survive the unforgiving streets. In the wake of that visit, the judge didn't just give a sentence. He offered a lifeline, a crossroads that could twist his destiny toward the light or the dark. If Greg wanted to taste the sweet air of liberty, early if he wanted to escape the 9-month cage and the looming shadow of hard time as an adult, he had to make a solemn pact to earn his GED and accept the watchful eye of probation. No school meant no freedom, simple as that. Greg took the deal, and because he embraced that path, the gates opened for him after 3 months instead of the full stretch. The moment his feet hit the pavement, he didn't waste a breath. He threw himself into a program like Operation Push, attacking his GED studies with fire while still under the heavy hand of probation. When he conquered that test, he didn't rest on his laurels. About 6 months later, barely 18 and hungry for more, Greg walked through the doors of Eastern Michigan University. Can you believe it? The same Chico who once peddled poison and ran with stolen steel was now sitting front and centre in a lecture hall devouring books on public administration and the art of rising up. His journey was curving, shifting from a soldier of the streets to a warrior who might one day stand in the sacred halls of justice for a noble cause. That metamorphosis, that beautiful change from darkness to light, is exactly why the people point to him today as a living, breathing monument of redemption. Into the early 1980s, he kept climbing that mountain. While the skeptics still saw only a thug from the past, Greg was working in the shadows, grinding with a silent, burning passion. From 1983 to 1987, his life was a relentless rhythm of struggle and study at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. When the sun was up, he laboured. When the moon rose, he studied until his eyes burned. On May 17th, 1987, he held that Juris Doctor degree in his hands like a holy relic. But the past is a jealous lover. It doesn't let go without a fight. When Greg reached for his law licence, the Michigan bar slammed the door in his face. Not once, but 3 heartbreaking times between 1987 and 1988. On paper, The situation looked completely hopeless. The statistics were cold. The general pass rate was sitting pretty at 72%, but Greg had a ghost haunting him, his own history staring back from the mirror. For a man with a felony mark, hope was a flickering candle with odds hovering around a mere 5%. Greg's turbulent history was an anchor dragging him down. His dossier bled with 12 arrests tied to gang wars and illicit substances. Under Rule 7, ethics that dark past made him look like a gamble the system refused to take. The letters of rejection arrived like daggers to the heart. One struck on March 5th, 1987. Another followed on June 12th, 1987. Each piece of paper screamed the same painful truth: his sins carried more weight on the scales than all his sweat and tears to change. After all the sacrifice, all the sleepless nights to them, he was still just the delinquent kid from the block, not the man he was fighting to become. Lesser men would have walked away in bitterness, but Greg, he took that agony, that rejection, and threw it into the furnace of his ambition to burn even brighter. On September 15th, 1988, Greg marched his battle straight to the Michigan Supreme Court, and he didn't come begging with empty hands. He slammed down a petition penned by his own hand, armoured with 5,000 signatures from the gente, the people who believed in his soul. He brought the voices of 200 young lives he had saved through mentorship and the blessing of titans like Clyde Cleveland. He forced the high justices to open their eyes and see the full panorama. Not just the boy clutching a pistol, but the man who returned to the rubble to rebuild the very community he once helped destroy. Was this the move of a madman or a genius? How would he turn this tragedy into triumph? Stay with me, because by 1989, Greg was ready to step into the chaotic ring of politics. At just 29 years old, full of fire, he ran for Detroit City Council with a narrative that cut deeper than any other candidates. He had been a gang member, a prisoner behind bars. Now he stood tall before the city as an activist screaming for a revolution of change. His crusade focused on police reform, justice, and opening doors. The media tried to dig up his skeletons, but the people, they listened to the beating of his heart. He didn't take the throne that election, but the shockwave he created was undeniable. His campaign forced the city to look at the ugly face of police brutality and gave a voice to young warriors who thought they were invisible. That defeat was merely the cornerstone of his legend, lifting him to national fame and earning him a seat at the table of the mighty NAACP board. What started as a local brawl grew into a nationwide movement. In 1990, he took another audacious step forward. Greg launched the Youth Empowerment Program, a radical weapon designed to shatter the cursed cycle of chains release and rearrest that enslaved so many brothers. He went further than most angels would dare to tread. He personally paid the ransom bail money for over 200 former members of the Errol Flynn gang, granting them a miracle of a second chance when the world called them trash. Through strict structure mentorship and tough love lives were reborn, the numbers sang the truth loud and clear. His boys were 40% more likely to wear a cap and gown and 50% less likely to stand in the unemployment line. It became the gold standard for saving our youth. Greg proved a universal truth: when you embrace someone at their darkest hour, you give them the strength to climb out of hell itself. 5 years later, in 1995, the heavens finally opened, and that belief paid off. At 35, after being knocked down 3 times, Greg passed the bar. The chains of his criminal record finally shattered and could not hold him back. And that very same year, destiny smiled as Detroit Mayor Dennis Archer handed him the gavel, appointing him interim judge of the 36th District Court. The boy who once rotted in a jail cell now sat upon the throne of judgment, proving that no destiny is written in stone. He shattered the mould to become the youngest magistrate the state of Michigan had ever seen, standing as a living, breathing testament to salvation, whose legend echoed far beyond the city limits of Detroit. His courtroom was a mirror of his own arduous path. He was authoritative, yet just ruling with a steady hand, guided by a profound soul. Every bang of his gavel served as a declaration that mercy and new beginnings had the power to reconstruct a broken city from the ground up. Later that same year, the people made their voices heard, handing Greg a sweeping victory with 78% of the ballots cast in his favour. His campaign cry was simple, yet it struck a chord in the heart of every voter. Second chances. It was a promise whispered to the forgotten avowed, to those discarded by society, and to the barrios that had long since lost faith in the machinery of justice. You see, Greg had walked in shoes that no law school graduate could ever fill. His time behind bars gave him a raw, undeniable truth that no fancy degree or polished curriculum vitae could ever replicate. The saga of his ascent, rising from a 17-year-old locked in a cell to a presiding judge at just 35, captured the imagination of the entire nation, spreading like wildfire across the headlines. His earlier battle to even practice law, a fight he took all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court and won, transformed into a beacon of possibility for everyone watching from the shadows. That triumph did more than just unlock a career. It shattered the ceiling, proving to the world that a difficult first chapter does not dictate how the book must end. By the year 1997, Judge Mathis was no longer just dreaming of a better world. He was building it brick by brick, turning his philosophy into concrete judicial systems. He inaugurated the city's very first program, specifically for veterans designed to shield non-violent souls from the cage of prison. He traded the cold steel of punishment for the warm embrace of purpose and direction. More than 1,200 human beings were saved from the cycle of incarceration, receiving instead the tools of a trade, the guidance of mentors, and the dignity of honest work. And what came of these radical acts of kindness? Let us look closely at the enduring legacy of change that Greg left behind for his people. Greg didn't lead from a tower. He went into the trenches, personally enlisting mentors and visiting the jails every single week to look inmates in the eye and speak of self-worth and redemption. His unorthodox methods sent shockwaves through the old guard, yet the results were undeniable, flourishing in ways the skeptics never thought possible. Those who entered his care found healing through counselling and stability through employment, with the vast majority never returning to crime. It was undeniable proof that compassion could heal wounds that incarceration only deepened. Between 1997 and 1999, the spotlight found his courtroom yet again, but this time for a daring new initiative that defied convention. He began throwing out nearly 40% of minor substance charges, keeping young men out of cages and putting them to work restoring the very streets they lived on. He knew the neighbourhood didn't need more shattered families, it cried out for transformation. In just 2 years, the rate of repeat offences in his district plummeted by a staggering 65%. Instead of sitting in a cell, young offenders were out scrubbing graffiti, guiding children, and lifting up the local community centres with their own hands. Every task performed turned the shame of punishment into the pride of contribution. The community realised his justice wasn't weak, it was potent, effective, and deeply necessary. While the detention centres grew quiet, the neighbourhoods began to sing with new life, and through it all, Greg remained a constant present force. Week after week, he walked the corridors of the city's jails, sitting face to face with men who had surrendered to despair, reigniting the spark within them. He established brotherhoods within the walls, educational paths and empowerment initiatives, seeds of change that eventually blossomed across the entire country. He bared his soul, sharing his own turbulent history to prove he was one of them, demonstrating that reinvention is within reach for any man brave enough to seek it. Hundreds of souls passed through Greg's network of guidance, and in a beautiful twist of fate, many returned to become the guides for the next generation. It was a cascade of grace transformation, multiplying one saved life at a time, creating a legacy that could not be erased. His bond with the black community grew unbreakable, for they saw him not as a distant magistrate, but as a brother who truly knew their pain. By 1998, the ballot box confirmed their profound trust. He secured 85% of the vote, a historic margin that roared with the approval of the people he served. His balanced hand, especially regarding firearms, earned him the salute of both law enforcement and the streets. Handling over 500 such cases annually, he chose the path of rehabilitation for novices rather than the ruin of rigid sentencing. His transparency served as a constant reminder to the court that the man in the robe had once stood where the defendants now trembled. That raw honesty and unwavering consistency cemented his status as one of the city's most cherished and respected icons. Then destiny arrived with a moment that would alter the trajectory of his existence forever. On September 13th, 1999, Judge Mathis stepped onto the global stage, broadcasting from the NBC Tower in Chicago in a groundbreaking production by Warner Brothers. With a unique blend of stern discipline, sharp wit, and undeniable soul, he brought a flavour to television that no one had ever tasted before. Families across America tuned in to see a magistrate who spoke the language of the people who felt their struggles in his bones and who turned legal disputes into profound lessons on living. Before long, his wisdom was beaming into homes in all 50 states and Canada 5 days a week. By 2023, the saga had spanned over 3,900 episodes. Yet behind every chuckle and every stern lecture stood a man who had walked through the fire he was now preaching about. Across 24 seasons, he presided over more than 13,000 disputes, cementing the programme as one of the most enduring courtroom sagas in the annals of history. While the litigants were given travel and a stipend between $150 and $300, the true attraction was always the magnetic presence of the judge himself. His quick tongue, street-honed wisdom, and deep compassion turned a simple courtroom set into a sanctuary of both entertainment and moral education. By the year 2018, Greg Mathis stood tall as the longest-reigning black male host in the history of the genre. Second only to the legendary Judge Judy, he accomplished what few dare to dream, weaving together the harsh truth of the law with the tender touch of humanity on a national platform. From the turn of the millennium onward, the world continued to shower him with the recognition his tireless work deserved. He gathered multiple NAACP Image Awards, and in April 2018, he etched his name in history, once more becoming the first black jurist to claim the Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Legal Courtroom Programme. As he entered the milestone of his 20th season, he continued to evolve and expand his influence. He embraced the honour with a heart full of gratitude, lifting up the voices of his beautifully diverse team and demanding that the television world finally open its doors to everyone. Yet these golden trophies meant far more than simple vanity or fleeting fame. They represented a profound impact on the soul, proving to millions that the dream of a second chance is never just a fairy tale. The redemption was tangible, breathing life into the room. With a live audience bearing witness, the programme became legendary for its raw electric energy and moments overflowing with pure, unfiltered emotion. He laid down the law on absent fathers, chastised those who lacked ambition, and miraculously transformed petty disputes into profound life lessons about honour and personal responsibility. His razor-sharp wit and brutal emotional honesty dominated the atmosphere, crafting unforgettable scenes that spread like wildfire across the digital landscape. Audiences did not merely watch a screen, they felt his spirit resonating with theirs as every single episode carried the sacred message that served as his life's compass. It does not matter how low you begin, salvation is always within reach. But step away now from the gavel and the glory to see the man behind the robes. What was the reality of Judge Greg's private world? Stay with us to discover the beating heart of his existence, Judge Greg's beautiful, passionate family life. His private life was overflowing with intense purpose. He found his soulmate Linda Reese at Eastern Michigan University, and in a whirlwind of destiny, just months after mourning his mother, they united in marriage on June 1st, 1985. Hand in hand, they constructed a family dynasty that would soon rise to become one of the most beloved and recognisable clans in television history. Their union was blessed with 4 children, Jade arriving in May of 1985, Kamara following in October of 1987, and Greg Jr. Born in January of 1989, followed by Amir in July of 1990, they all flourished in Detroit, raised in a home filled with both strict discipline and overwhelming love. Linda was the queen of the household and the treasury, while Greg worked with relentless passion to ascend the legal ladder, juggling the sacred duties of fatherhood with a career destined for stardom. In the year 1995, at the tender age of just 35, Greg Mathis shattered expectations to become the youngest judge ever elected in the history of Michigan. This triumph was not merely professional, it was a monument built on the pillars of family strength, deep sacrifice and unshakable faith bonds that would carry them decades later into the bright lights of Hollywood. In May of 2022, Greg was immortalised with a star on the Walk of Fame, a powerful symbol of the resilience that transformed a struggling boy from Detroit into a true national icon. Yet the family was destined to face its most public and challenging trial shortly thereafter in the month of June 2022. It happened when Greg Jr. bravely revealed his truth, coming out as gay during the highly anticipated premiere of Mathis Family Matters. This profound revelation was broadcast across the nation, a moment of raw vulnerability that caught even his own father completely off guard. For so many years, Greg Jr. had carried this secret in silence, terrified of judgment and worrying how it might stain his father's reputation. But that single night changed their destiny forever. Greg confessed to a deep pain, not of shame, but of sorrow, that his son felt unsafe sharing his heart, yet in a heartbeat he stood firmly and proudly beside him. The cameras immortalised the love, the falling tears, and the silent vow of a father that no soul would ever dare harm his son without facing his wrath first. The episode captured the nation's attention, sending ratings soaring by nearly 30% and transforming an intimate moment into a crucial nationwide conversation about love and acceptance within black families. Mathis Family Matters, which premiered in June of 2022, had already thrown open the heavy doors to their private sanctuary. It displayed everything from intense therapy sessions and real estate battles to fiery sibling rivalries and moments of pure infectious laughter. These scenes reminded the audience of their shared humanity, proving that their courageous openness was a risk that paid off beautifully. By the year 2023, the Mathis name had flourished into a colossal $20 million empire built upon endorsements, vast real estate ventures, and brilliant strategic partnerships. Greg Jr., a proud graduate of the University of Michigan, armed with a prestigious degree in political science, wisely leveraged his high-stakes experience in Washington, D.C. politics to help expand the horizons of their growing ventures. Linda masterfully controlled the finances, handling complex contracts and assets, while Greg filmed a staggering 260 courtroom episodes a year, but viewers were drawn to more than just the glitz. They were captivated by the raw honesty, admiring the way the Mathis family allowed the world to witness both their fragile cracks and their immense, unyielding strength. Yet behind every triumph, Linda remained the steady grounding force. She had constructed her own foundation long before the fame, opening 5 preschools that nurtured thousands of children. Her brilliant, quiet business mind shaped the family's destiny and was instrumental in securing Greg's impressive $20 million net worth. She orchestrated appearances, negotiated high-stakes deals, and maintained the peace whenever the pressures of fame began to pull them in different directions. She was far more than just his wife. She was his essential balance, the singular force who could miraculously turn chaos into perfect order. On the 21st of October 2024, Greg stood upon the golden sands of a beach in Cabo San Lucas, officiating the wedding of his beloved son, Greg Jr., to Elliot Cooper. The gentle ocean breeze carried the sweet sound of laughter into the air as both fathers, Judge Mathis and Sergeant Calvin Cooper, proudly led the moving ceremony. Greg Jr. and Elliot had first crossed paths in 2016, and Cabo remained their sacred sanctuary, the very site of their first romantic voyage together. The wedding felt like a magnificent full-circle moment, for the family had spent years battling against the harsh winds of judgment and misunderstanding. And now here stood Greg, bestowing blessings upon his son's union for all the world to see, in an act that friends whispered was nothing short of pure healing. The couple vowed to hold a grander celebration in Los Angeles and spoke openly of their dreams to start a family, marking a moment of absolute pure peace for the Mathis household. But alas, a dark storm was brewing on the horizon, one powerful enough to completely shatter this fragile happiness. What kind of tempest was approaching? How did it manage to rip Judge Greg's blissful existence apart? Keep your eyes on the screen to discover the scandals that threatened to tear Judge Greg's world to pieces. On the 23rd of August 2019, Greg faced a firestorm of public controversy when a valet boldly accused him of spitting on him outside Flood's Bar and Grill in the heart of Detroit. The trouble ignited over the mystery of missing Rolls-Royce keys, a spark that quickly exploded into scandalous national headlines. Greg confessed to raising his voice in a moment of heated passion, yet he swore on his life that he never spat on a soul. The authorities scoured the scene for proof, but like a ghost in the night, the accuser vanished and the case crumbled into dust. But peace is often fleeting. Years later, in the scorching heat of July 2023, a new tempest gathered. A city worker named Ricardo Agosta cried out that Greg had brandished a weapon threatening him after a truck dared to block the entrance to the judge's sanctuary, his home. According to this man's dramatic tale, Mathis stormed into his fortress, retrieved a firearm and returned with fire in his eyes, shouting the street warning, "I will bust a cap." The Los Angeles police searched high and low but found not a shred of solid proof, and the law turned its back on the charges. Yet the black ink of the headlines remained staining his name in the court of public opinion. Greg's defender stood firm like a shield, declaring these accusations to be utter falsehoods, painting them as merely another envious attempt to drag a successful man through the mud and tarnish his hard-won honour. Then arrived 2024, a year defined by fierce vendettas and whispered rumours. Greg found himself in a public duel with the rapper 50 Cent over a cinematic project close to his heart, the First Lady of BMF, the Taneza Welch story. Wearing the hat of executive producer, Greg took to the digital plaza of Instagram, calling out 50 Cent directly. He implored him to show brotherhood and support the work rather than tearing it down with criticism. "You my brother," Greg declared with conviction. "Let he eat?" It was a simple phrase, but it sparked a wildfire across the internet that burned for days. The spectators watched with bated breath as two titans of Detroit locked horns, a battle not just about art, but about pride, machismo, and the demand for respect. As if that were not enough drama for one soul, the tabloids began to spin wicked tales, whispering that Greg had fathered a child in the shadows, labelling it the scandalous side baby affair. Yet, amidst this hurricane of chaos, one lie cut sharper than a knife. People began to say his beloved television court had been shuttered because of that alleged 911 gun incident. The gossip mills of social media churned out wild fables of police interventions and torn contracts, but it was all smoke and mirrors. The Judge Mathis show concluded its glorious run after 24 seasons, not in disgrace, but simply because its time had come. The truth was far less scandalous. Warner Brothers had simply decided to close the doors on their daytime courtroom business, ending a chapter of history. The final curtain fell on May 25, 2023. It was a moment of solemn reflection, marking the end of a golden era, not the explosion of a controversy. But destiny is never finished. Just weeks prior, in February 2023, a new opportunity arose when Byron Allen's media empire extended a hand of partnership. Greg wasted no time. He signed the pact almost instantly, securing his triumphant return to the screen with Mathis Court with Judge Mathis, which made its grand debut on September 11th, 2023. This rebirth was special for his own blood. His son Amir stood by his side as the bailiff. It transformed the programme into a true family dynasty, a fresh chapter built on the twin pillars of legacy and redemption. By 2025, the series was commanding the attention of 2 million viewers every week, proving that his people had never abandoned him. Even when the ghost of old allegations rose again, the fans remained as loyal as family. They craved his booming voice, his fiery passion, and that unique alchemy of judicial authority mixed with the hard-earned wisdom of the Detroit streets. Long before the bright lights of fame found him, Greg had already laid his soul bare in Inner City, Miracle, his memoir penned in the year 2002. In those pages, he chronicled his youth in the concrete jungle of Detroit's Herman Gardens, his dangerous dance with the Errol Flynn gang, and that fateful instant when a compassionate judge granted him one final shot at salvation. He recounted the humble days of flipping burgers at McDonald's, the struggle to earn his GED, and the relentless climb that eventually led him through the doors of law school. That testament to resilience sold over 500,000 copies, and the proceeds became a fountain of hope, funding youth programs in Detroit to give other lost children the second chance he had been blessed with. That book was not just paper and ink, it became the very soul and foundation of every empire he would later build. As 2025 rolled around, Greg discovered a new rhythm working alongside his son Amir on the Mathis verdict at a podcast where they dissected the dramas of celebrity court cases. One of their most volatile episodes confronted the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs. True to his nature, Greg did not bite his tongue. He branded Diddy a monster without hesitation and surgically took apart the RICO charges, illustrating how a web of separate crimes could be woven together to form a single devastating indictment. Their raw, unfiltered honesty turned the podcast into a sensation. The listeners were hungry for more than just idle gossip. They sought the unvarnished truth seen through the eyes of a judge. But then came the moment that reminded the world that even the mighty Judge Greg Mathis was only a man made of flesh and blood. It was a trial of the heart that nearly broke his spirit for the second time in his life. What was this tragedy and how did he survive the aftermath? You must keep watching to discover the truth. It was the Judge Greg Mathis divorce that shook the very foundations of the internet. In August 2024, his beloved Linda filed the papers threatening to end a union that had spanned nearly 40 glorious years. The news travelled faster than a lightning strike. Greg was left completely shattered, his heart in pieces on the floor. For weeks, they lived in separate worlds, each bearing the crushing weight of a broken heart, and both turned to therapy to navigate the labyrinth of their pain. But love is resilient. By October 2025, they appeared together on the Tamron Hall show, revealing to the world that they had reconciled their hearts after only 3 weeks of separation. Greg confessed that the heartbreak felt as devastating as the day he lost his mother. Linda explained that through therapy, she had learned to nurture her own soul once again. They sat side by side, hands clasped tight, openly confessing their errors. Greg looked into the camera and warned men everywhere with the gravity of a sage, do not neglect your wife. Their raw honesty transformed a public tragedy into a beautiful testament of healing. Still, Greg did not hide in the shadows of denial. He stood before the world and admitted that his affair had been real, describing it as a grave, unplanned mistake, a moment of weakness. Linda confirmed the betrayal on social media, but she clarified with grace that the deeper wound had been the years of growing emotional distance, not merely the act of infidelity. The scandal had been a roaring thunder, but their reconciliation sang louder than any storm. Together they returned to the sanctuary of their faith, joining church mentorship programs and launching a ministry dedicated to guiding young men raised by single mothers. By December 2025, they stood united once more, wiser scarred by the battle, but stronger than steel. Greg vowed no more scandals, using his own life as a lesson that redemption is always within reach. The television magistrate Greg Mathis and his enduring wife Linda now declare that putting in the hard labour of love after their devastating breakup in August 2024 is exactly the miracle that ultimately wove their lives back together. After a mere 3 weeks of darkness, the couple found their way back to the light of each other's arms. As they say, we have truly enjoyed the work we have been doing day by blessed day. Linda, a woman of grace and wisdom at 62, opened the doors to her heart during an intimate conversation on the Tamron Hall show, which is scheduled to air on the 8th of October. As reported by the storytellers at People, this transition has been a journey of steady rhythms, and in truth, every single day has blossomed into something wonderful and full of life. After 39 years of sharing a life and a home, Linda filed for divorce, yet she explained with dignity that this choice was not born from the fires of anger or the poison of blame, but was simply an act of saving her own soul. I remained his pillar of support through everything, she confessed with deep emotion. But the moment arrived when I realised I had to nurture my own spirit. That was the path I simply had to walk for myself. For Greg, the separation struck him like a thunderbolt, absolutely devastating his world. The agony of losing his wife, the sacred matriarch of their 4 children, Jade Chimera, Greg Jr. and Amir, cut as deeply into his heart as the tragic loss of his own mother. Those were the darkest, most sorrowful days of my entire existence. He admitted to TMZ on August 30th. If there is a lesson here, let my suffering serve as a warning to other men, he declared passionately. Do not take the queen of your house for granted, for that is exactly how you lose your paradise. He humbled himself further, admitting that neglect is the seed that naturally grows into the weeds of doubt and suspicion. When you are absent as often as I am, a woman has every right to look at the shadows and question what lies within them, he reflected. You are out there travelling for work, serving the community, attending grand events and cheering at games, often leaving your wife behind in solitude. Any woman standing in her shoes with a heart that cares would naturally let her mind wander and wonder about the truth. Yet despite the heavy strain on their bond, Greg made it crystal clear that his absolute priority was healing the sanctity of his marriage. We still share the same roof and are keeping the flame of our friendship alive, he stated at the time. Now words are not enough. I must prove my devotion through my actions. I am fighting with everything I have to win back the love of my life. The couple first united their destinies in June of 1985 when Greg was a young man of 25. In the year 2021, he looked back on their saga with a nostalgic wedding photo, writing, "Marrying Linda was the compass that set me in the right direction. I truly hope my journey lights a path for others." What are your thoughts on Judge Greg's emotional voyage through the trials of divorce and the hope of settlement? Do you believe another storm might be gathering on the horizon for this family? Please share your wisdom and opinions in the comments section below. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for watching this video. We hope you found a spark of inspiration in the dramatic story of Judge Greg. It is a tale that goes from a troubled childhood to making a national impact. Please do not forget to show your love by liking and subscribing to our community. Click the next video appearing on your screen to keep up with the passionate stories of your favourite celebrities. We will see you there, amigos.